Okay, good evening everybody. Welcome to part 9, I believe, of Finding Your Path, our journey through Mesilas Yesharim, the path of the just by Yesharim Livrocha. Essential work of Musa, ethical self-improvement. So we started last week chapter 3, Bevei Chelkei HaZehirus. As we said before, Zehirus means watchfulness or carefulness. The watchword is think. A person needs to think about what he's doing, analyze his actions. As we said in previous weeks, first of all he has to establish an intellectual clarity as to what is actually good and what is bad. It's very easy for those lines to be blurred. He has to think what is really good, what is really bad. And then he has to apply fit into that prejudged matrix of moral clarity where his actions actually fit. And we said before, Mesilas Yesharim tells he has to do that before he does an action, after he does an action as well, to see whether in point of fact he was correct in his original judgment. So we're in Perek Gimel, chapter 3, and I strongly suggest that you have a copy of it in front of you, because we're going to be doing a lot of work inside, as they say, from the text itself. We're going to start about the end of the first section here, where it says, this idea of checking his actions and weighing them against the prejudged list of what he has intellectually arrived at the conclusion, what is the true good and what is the true bad. Once he's done that, and if he finds anything that requires that's bad, he should remove it from his actions. And as we finished off last week talking about finding tachbulot, stratagems to avoid falling into the same trap again. The nature of a person, as we've said this many times before, he says, the Mesilas says that a person is habitual. A person can habituate himself to good things and bad things. Nobody thinks about brushing their teeth in the morning. It leaves room in their minds for more important decisions. But similarly, if a person doesn't analyze his actions, he'll repeat actions which are bad, quite simply, evil, negative, unless he checks it out. I don't know if you can find this in your book. It's about, in my book here, about 10 lines down into chapter 3, Perek Gimel. This idea was our sages have informed us, as it says in Eruvin, Noach lo la'odam shelo nivra, yoseh mishin nivra. V'achshav shenivra yefashfesh b'masav v'ikadamri yemashmesh b'masav. Let's translate. Noach lo la'odam. It would have been better. I don't know exactly how to translate Noach. How does he translate it there? More pleasant. Noach means like restful. What does he say? You want to give it to me? I'll find it for you. Yeah. Whoops. Here. It would have been better. Here. It would have been better for man not to have been created. I mean, I don't think that, in a sense, I understand why he translated as better, but better, Noach is not. It means more comfortable. Noach. Nach is to rest. It would have been more comfortable for a person, Shelo Nivro, that he would not have been created, more than having been created. Akshav Shenivra, but now, since man has been created, Yefash Feish B'masov, he should examine. Pishpush, we're going to discuss this, he should examine his actions. Ve'ikada Omri, and there's a different opinion that says he doesn't have to check his actions, he has to Yemashmesh B'masov. Now, Mashmesh, what's the difference between Pishpush and Mishmush? So we're going to see. Yemashmesh literally means to feel. To feel out his actions. We'll discuss this. So first of all, this is a very strange, has to be understood, and I'm sure this came to mind. What do you mean it's better for man that he hadn't been created? The whole of the purpose of the creation was for there to be a creature called man that Hashem can give, so to speak, benefit him with the tov that, by virtue of who Hashem is, that he wants to give to another, so to speak. Deep ideas we spoke about in the past, the whole idea of tzimtzum, Kabbalistic idea by, so to speak, Hashem allows the existence, of course this has to be understood on a deeper level, but very simplistically allows the existence of something else apart from himself. And the purpose of this, that's the world, that's man. Man is the creature, the entity that Hashem created to be the recipient of this good, that, as we said, by virtue of who Hashem is, if one can say such a thing, that he wants to give good to another. So how can you say that it would be better had man not have been created? I mean, that's the whole purpose of the creation.
There would be no suffering.
There would have been no suffering, okay.
No averas.
There would have been no averas. For sure, I think we can say Noach lo la'odam. From man's point of view, I want to say that from man's point of view, and he says here something interesting in the notes. No, I've lost it now. I don't know what it is. I'll find it afterwards. Basically, the idea is that it's true that the whole purpose of the world was for there to be a creational man who can choose the good, and by choosing, earn the good which is closest to Hashem, which he speaks about in the first opening chapters. But man should understand that his very existence in this world, as he said before, because he's in a physical existence, he has this tremendous tendency to go off the rails. As we said before, the nature of physicality is to draw a person away from Hashem. So, in a sense, it would have been easier, it would have been Noach for a person not to have been created, because he's in imminent danger. When a person comes into this world, the very fact of his physical existence, the very fact that he's in this situation of challenge, of nisayon, as we spoke about in previous weeks, means that he is in an immediate situation of danger, and if he doesn't take steps, the steps that the Yesharim prescribes to avoid this danger, he inevitably will fall, and he'll find himself in a lot of trouble. So that's why a person has to start off with this idea of, if he wants to, his whole creation, so to speak, predisposes him to a physicality which will take him away from Hashem. Left unchecked, this is the drives of a person, the physical drives of a person, the fact that the neshama is wrestling with this physicality. But if a person doesn't take these steps, he inevitably will fail. Noach la'odam shelo nivra. Why? Because he's in immediate danger. Yosem mishenivra, more than he should have been, because obviously if he hadn't been created, then he wouldn't be having this problem. Mitzad HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we can speak about that. From Hashem's point of view, clearly man has to be created, because man is the recipient of the good that God, by virtue of who God is, so to speak, creates in order that man can receive this goodness. But the process of him receiving this goodness in the best possible way, which necessitates this challenge, means that unless a person takes up this challenge and uses his brain and thinks, he inevitably will fail. And that's why one could say, Noach lo lodem shelo nivra. But now that he has been created, yefash feish b'ma'asav, that's what he's saying, a person has to check his actions. Now, what are these two different words, pishpush and mishmush? So yefash feish, let's read it inside. V'tireh sheshnei haloshonos heim, these two expressions of pishpush and mishmush. Heim shtei ashoros tovos umeilos ma'od. These are two warnings which are extremely effective. They're two different things. Ki hinei hapishpush b'maasim hu lachko al klal hamaasim ulisbonim boy. Pishpush means that a person should examine the generality, he should look at everything he does and investigate them, and to discern within his actions, hanimtza behem masim asher lo yaseh. He should see, are there things that I'm doing which I should not be doing? That's pishpush. Pishpush is let's say, a more general, a more obvious, a more self-evident kind of checking. Why should I do that? Because asher einam holchim al pi mitzvahs Hashem v'chukov, that they are not according to Hashem's mitzvahs and His statutes. The two words here, mitzvahs Hashem and chukov, he makes a distinction between the two, because a mitzvah, here I think he's talking about things which are logical to us. And a chok is always understood to mean something which is supra-rational, something I don't understand why I'm doing this. Para aduma is the classic example, the red heifer, the purification, which purifies the impure and impurifies the pure. But there are other examples of chukim. So a person should check whether he is, in point of fact, not transgressing the mitzvahs logical, which are, many of the mitzvahs are seemingly logical. Kibbut of aim, honoring your parents, not killing, not stealing. But there are mitzvahs, as we said, which defy rational explanation. And he has to also check whether, in point of fact, he's doing those properly. Because anything he finds which is definitely not in accord with the Torah and halacha, he has to expunge those from his life. That's pishpush. Ach amishmush hu hakira afilu b'masim tovim atzmam. This is a very interesting, subtle point. That a person has to take his good actions and he should examine those as well. Why? Lachkor, to investigate, v'liros, and to see, hayesh be'inyonam, that whether there is in their subject, within them, eza pniya asher lo tova, some aspect which is not good, or eza chelek ra, or some more than that, more than an aspect, maybe some portion of what he's doing which is essentially good but is not good. Sheyitztarech lahasiro levaro, that he has to remove that and expunge that. Reizer ke mashmesh bebeged. That's the idea. Mishmush is to feel. The mamashmesh is to feel, like when a person goes, and that's the mashal he's saying here. Livchon hatov v'chosaku ucholosh obolui.
Like feeling the garment.
Exactly. When a person goes in and he wants to buy some cloth, he feels it. Does it feel strong? Does it feel weak? So this is the idea of mishmush. Mishmush is a closer up, so to speak. You feel out your actions. They look good. Looks like a nice, let's say, take the mashal of the cloth. Beautiful cloth. But you feel it and you go, this is a bit worn out. This is not, this has been on the shelves for too long. Similarly with one's actions, a person has to also examine the quality of what he's doing, and to find whether there's some. I remember my Rebbe told me a story. At one point, he was steiging very starkly in Baltimore, and he was in the Beis Medrash alone one night at about 12:30, and somebody came in behind him, and he really had this tremendous desire to turn around and see who it was that was catching him being such a tzaddik. So even when a person is learning but there's hang on a second, why am I doing this? Maybe I'm also want a little bit of virtue signaling, as they call it nowadays, a little bit of glory. So a person has to look even at the good things that he's doing and see whether there's something in his actions which some part of it is not totally l'shem shamayim, is not totally for the sake of heaven, which is maybe selfish, or, as we said, maybe bound up with honor seeking. I think, if you look, we're going to see how important it is to examine your actions. But again, two ideas: a person has to examine his actions, he has to check, he has to think about what he's doing in the generality to make sure he's not doing anything which is clearly wrong, and even the things which he's doing right, to make sure that there's no aspect of those which are not beseda. Let's go on. Klal davar. The general principle is Yeh Adam me'ayin al masov kulam u'mefakech al kol devorov shelo yaniach la'atzmo hergel ra u'midara kol shekain aveira u'fesha. Klal hadova. Let's go back to the beginning of the sentence and translate. The general principle is that a person should delve into, he should look closely into his actions, all of his actions, and superintend and check on all of his ways. There are two things here. One, the individual, there's an individual action, and there's also where is he going? Maybe his actions in themselves are not bad. Maybe he's doing nothing which is wrong. But if he puts together these actions and he extrapolates them, a person has to think, where does this lead me to? Which derech am I following? Which way am I going? Each individual action by itself may be permissible, maybe okay. But when you add it all up, every masa, every action, when added together with all of your actions, comprises a derech, a path. And so a person has to check both of those, both the individual actions and also his ways, that he shouldn't leave in himself hergel ra, a bad habit, or midara, or a bad character trait. Now, of the two of these, clearly, a character trait is much more difficult to change. A habit is also not so easy to change. But a habit can be broken by replacing that habit with another habit. It's much easier in life to replace than to repair. What I mean is that it's very difficult to desist from something if nothing positive is put in its place. The best way to change something bad is to replace it with something good. The best way, let's say a person has a problem that he looks at his phone. He has an iPhone in his room at night, and he can't resist looking at this phone. So there's one thing he can try and stop himself from doing that. But maybe, for that time, until he gets tired, he should replace that with something which is innocuous, like reading a history book. In other words, do something, and I'm not saying reading history is necessarily the most positive thing in the world, but compared with what you can see on your iPhone, it's surely a good idea. I mean, I just, by the by, mentioned some research that I saw that and we're talking even about something which is perfectly permissible and not in any way obscene, but the mere stimulation of looking in the dark at a colorful screen with movement and sound stimulates a person. It will not let a person, it does not relax a person. Anybody who knows that reading a book at night is the best way to go to sleep for many people. I speak for myself. It's good if the book isn't, I wouldn't suggest you read what they call a cliffhanger. Something where, what they call it now, a page turner. Something where you've got to, what's happened? If you take something fairly, I like reading history, so history is it's quite soporific anyway. So, but something that, it's nice to read and it's relaxing, and so rather than, and another thing, I'll just say this is a no-brainer. First of all, you never ever take, if you have a phone, I don't know if you have phones, some people in the yeshiva do have these iPhones, or these smartphones, but if you do have a phone, do not bring it into your bedroom, ever. Never, ever, ever bring the smartphone into the bedroom. And I promise you, you will change your life. If there's one simple thing that you can do, give it to your friend, give it to somebody in a different dorm room. Here it is, give it back to me in the morning. I promise you that that's probably the most positive thing. If you're not doing this, if you're taking your phone with you into your bedroom at night, don't. Lock it up, give it to somebody, whatever. Just it can never cross the threshold of your room, and you'll see your life will change. Okay, we're talking about not looking at things which are obscene. Of course, that's a different problem in itself, a vast problem nowadays. But one of the things you can do is to not even get to the point where you have this machine in the room with you, in a situation where you're vulnerable. So we got off a bit off the subject, but then, so a person has to think, supervise and see what his actions are and where his actions are leading. Maybe we could plug this in and say, a person, he's got himself under control, or he thinks he has, and he has a filter on his phone, and he takes his phone into his room at night, and what's the worst he can do? He can, look at some Mary Poppins or something and keep himself up all night, which is also not such a good thing. But maybe if the phone's there and he'll just, there'll be some ad for something which will catch his eye, and very quickly, God forbid, he can be in a terrible place. If you don't take your phone into the room in the first place, you never got, right? You never had the problem to start off with. So in other words, that could be an action which in itself may be okay, but it's going to lead you to somewhere where you're going to get into a big problem. So look at your actions and see where your actions are leading you to. And also, as we said, to make sure that there's no bad habit or a bad midah. Now, as I said before, a midah is something which is much more difficult to change than a habit. Habits are difficult to change. I suggest replacement therapy. Replace your bad habits with good habits. I remember somebody came to me, said he had tremendous, this is worth mentioning actually, tremendous problem getting up for davening in the morning. Not an uncommon problem. And, it's the wrong way around. I hope we've got some decent recording here. And so he said to me, what could he do to make it easier for him to go to davening in the morning? So I asked my Rebbe this, and he said, tell him to run everywhere he goes. Run to lunch. Tell me you want to run. Everybody likes lunch, right? Run to lunch. Run. There's a sefer called the Sefer Chinuch, which we're not quite sure who wrote it, but it's one concept, one idea is it was written by a Rishon for his son to learn on Shabbos afternoon. And he has a very, very interesting observation, which he puts in several ways, but one of the ways he puts it is, Achrei pu'ulos nimshechim halavavos. After the actions are drawn the heart. Odom nifal lefi pu'ulotov is another way he puts it. The idea is as follows. And really it's interesting because this took behavioral psychology about 1,000 years to come to this conclusion. One of the things that a person has a problem, let's say with laziness, that you give a person actions which are going to, let's put it the other way around. A person tends to think, he thinks a certain way. He has certain ideas, and those ideas create emotions, and those emotions create actions. This is true, but the reverse is also true. Actions create emotions, which create thoughts. It's very difficult for a person to control his thoughts or his emotions. It's relatively much easier to control his actions. And that's why, in point of fact, one of the ideas why we put on the tefillin shel yod before the tefillin shel rosh. First of all, we have to harness the actions. When a person is doing something which is intrinsically good, the doing of the good will lead to an awakening, and that's why it's connected the leiv, it's next to the heart, will lead to an awakening of the heart, of the emotions, and the emotional response to the physical action. We're not talking about any kind of kavanah, just do what is good. When a person does something which is good, he feels the good, and when he has that emotion then leads to the thought. That's why we put the tefillin on the head last. This took, as I said, behavioral psychology about 1,000 years to figure out that if you want to get somebody to get out of their depression, for example, what do? Go and tell them to run around a field, even if they're depressed. Now, leaving aside any pharmacological effects of endorphins, which are going to stimulate the brain, which of course is true, but the mere habituation to do things which are good produces emotions, emotions produce thoughts. The example that the Sefer Chinuch brings is a guy who is a from Jew, but you know what his job is? He's a bailiff. You know what a bailiff is? A bailiff is somebody, a repro man. His job is to go and kick people out of their houses for non-payment of rent. Now, this is in essence an evil thing to do. It may be it's justified legally, but to remove somebody from their house is a rishus. It's a cruel thing to do. And he said, even if this person is a tzaddik gomor, doing actions, even if he's a complete tzaddik, doing these actions will make him into a rasha. So powerful is what we do. And that's why, if you think about it, the vast majority of mitzvahs that the Torah gives us are actions. Lulav, sukkah, tzitzis, tefillin, Shabbos. There are mitzvahs of thought, emunah, bitochen, ve'ohavta es Hashem elokecha. There are mitzvahs of emotions, but the vast panoply of mitzvahs are actions, because we can control our actions, and actions lead to feelings, and feelings lead to thought. So that's what he's saying. If a person wants to affect his midot, his character traits, which are essentially who he is, and as we said in previous times with Yisrael Salanta said, it's more difficult to learn, it's more difficult to change one single character trait than to learn the entire Torah. But that doesn't mean we can't, to a certain extent at least, do something about our personalities. We're not completely at the mercy of what we're, our character traits. We can, to a certain extent, if not change them, we can direct them. So, a person, if he channels his hergel, his habituation, which again, these are actions. A person changes his actions. He changes what he is habituated himself to do by replacing those actions. That eventually will lead to him being able to a certain extent, change his midot, his personality, which is something, of course, locked away from us much more than the physical actions that we can do. So a person has to check that. He has to check his habits, we said, his midot, not to have a bad midah, bad or character flaw. Kol shekain, to make sure that he's not doing an aveira or a pesha. Just 1 second here. Does he say a note on this? All the more so, of course, worse than habits and worse than character traits are the actual physicalization of doing the Aveira. Could be that Aveira here is something which is a person does out of physical desire, and the Pesha is like a willful sin. Okay. V'hineni roi tzarich ha'la'odam shiyeh medagtek v'shokel d'rochov dava yom b'yomo kasrochrim ha'gedolim asher yefalsu tomid kol iskehem leman lo yiskalkolu. I mean, nowadays this has come to coming back to phones. People are in business. They're checking the stock market every 2 seconds on their phones. So why are they doing that? Because a person who's in business has to make sure that everything's going okay. And if something's not going okay, he has to take corrective action very quickly. Why should a person's midot be any different? Why should a person's spiritual life be any less than his business life? If a person is constantly checking, I'm not saying that he should do it, maybe he should do it. I'm saying that if a person looks at his business, at his phone every 5 seconds to make sure that his stocks are going okay or whatever it is, or however often he checks it, certainly that's what he's saying here. A person should see the necessity for himself that he should be medaktek, precise, v'shokel derachov, and evaluate, literally weigh, his ways. Davar yom b'yomo, every single day. Kasocharim hagadolim, like the great merchants. Asher yefalsu, who are, the word peles in modern Hebrew means a spirit level, who are evaluating, tomid, constantly. Kol iskehem, all of their business, laman lo yiskalkalu, in order that it should not go bad, shouldn't have a a crash. And what does a person do? What does a businessman do? I mean, back in the day, probably businessmen used to get the copy of the Financial Times together with the toast and tea in bed that the butler used to bring in. So why? Because v'yikba, and he should fix itim, times, v'sha'ot, and hours lazeh. Shelo yeh mishkaloi arai ela b'kviyas godel, ki rav toladahu. We've talked about this in the past, but let's come back to it. A person has to set aside in a fixed, precise way, as he says. Let's just translate it. He should fix times and hours for this purpose of evaluation. That it should not be his evaluation, mishkaloi, arai, casual, ella rather, b'kavius godol, with great, how do you say kavius? What does he say?
He just saying for this grain, so that is not a fortuitous matter.
Kavius means like fixed, like he should fix definite times every day that he sits down and he checks his spiritual world. He checks everything we've been talking to up till now. Checks his actions, checks his ways, thinks about what he did, thinks about what was bad, gets rid of that, thinks about what he did that was good, and examines whether it was totally good, and refines that. Ki rav toladahu, because he says if you do this, you will get a tremendous result from this.
But doesn't it contradict itself?
Why?
Like when you examine your whole day and you're like, oh, here I was good, or here was even better, or here was probably not so good. But like it also, like we said about feeling the mitzvot, then he would just like, oh, here I shined in mitzvah. You didn't do it for God, you did it for himself to feel good. See, the point is like,
I think that a person will feel happy about doing the right thing.
mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think when a person does the right thing because he wants other people's praise, or that's what his intention is. But if a person should for sure feel satisfaction and encouragement, he has to encourage himself as well. He looks at today and he thinks, I got up, like a very good thing to do. I mean, I remember hearing by Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, I think he said that somebody once asked him what he put his success down to. So he said, I always made sure that I arrived 10 minutes early for learning, or davening, I think he said learning, and I left 10 minutes after everybody else. So, I don't know about you, but I know that if I turn up, let's say 5 minutes early for davening, it's a completely different davening. 5 minutes early for davening and 5 minutes late for davening is not 10 minutes. It's a different world. So a person can feel, okay, tomorrow I'm going to get up and I'm going to get to davening 5 minutes early. And he does it. So he feels, wow, that was good, I enjoyed that. That's good. There's nothing wrong with feeling good about doing things that are right. Similarly, a person feels like he didn't get to davening on time. Why didn't he get to davening on time? Maybe there was a legitimate reason, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe he just, messed around or procrastinated. So he feels bad about that. Okay, fine. So what am I going to do? I'm not going to wallow in this. I'm going to do better. Tomorrow I'm going to, that's why a person has to think, as I said, a good time to do this is at night, where you can run through the day. And
but you fall asleep quickly.
Yeah, you're right, but maybe you can do that before you actually get your pajamas on. Maybe just sit down before you say Kriya Shema Lamita, and spend whatever time that you think is necessary. It's also worthwhile, certainly, writing it down, keeping a diary. Partly because it's good to see your own progress. And it's also good to look back and see the things that were challenges that now have become good habits. So that also gives a person of encouragement. We all need encouragement. It's very important to make sure that you strengthen, you vindicate the things that you're doing that are good. I'm glad you brought that point up. Okay, so he says it has to be kaviyas godel. You have to make sure that it's fixed. You do this every day, every night, or every lunchtime, whenever it's good. You sit down and you analyze what you're doing in the ways we've discussed. Okay. V'chamin zichron levracha. Let's see how far we're going to get to today. I don't think we're going to finish the chapter. No, it's a long one. Let's see if we can get to a natural pause. V'chamin zichron levracha. Our sages of blessed memory said in Bava Basra, Al kein yomra hamoshlim bo cheshboin. Come to cheshboin.
Let us enter into an accounting.
Let us enter into an accounting. So it's the Gemara in Bava Basra, and that's where Al Kain. This is actually a posuk in Bamidbar. Al Kain Yomru Hamoshlim. Therefore, the what you call it this is actually a place Cheshbon. When Chazal darshan Cheshbon, the place, to mean something else. So he says Al Kain, says the Gemara, Yomru Hamoshlim. The Moshalim in the posuk means people who make up mashalim. A mashal in English is a parable. Thus say the parable creators, come to Cheshbon. Says the Gemara, thus say Yomra Hamoshalim. Now, Moshalim has another meaning. Moshel can mean a ruler. Those who rule B'yitzram, their Yetzer, their negative drive. Therefore, those people who've managed to dominate their negative drive. How? By this process we've been speaking up till now, a clear, honest analysis of what they're doing. Bo, come, v'nachshov cheshbono shalolam. That's the how do you say the pun on words. Let's come and make the cheshbono shalolam, the calculation of the world. What is this calculation of the world? As follows: Hefsed mitzvah keneged schara, the loss of doing a mitzvah as opposed to its reward. V'schar aveira, and the reward of an aveira, of doing a sin, keneged hefsedo, juxtaposed with the loss from doing an aveira. Now, this needs a bit of understanding. I mean, how can you lose by doing a mitzvah?
Bad intentions.
Money. Yeah. Nowadays, if you want to, and they say a joke, which I think the joke gets true and true every year. Why do we call matzah lechem oni, poor bread? Because by the time you finish paying for it, you're going to find lechem oni. No, it's a joke, but it's like all jokes, has some truth in it. I mean, nowadays people, very rich people, will pay thousands of dollars for a piece of fruit at Sukkot. And, all power to them, because they show the chavivus of the mitzvah. And if they have the money and then, they want to be mahada in the mitzvah, kol hakavod. But at the end of the day, you can't say that it's not a loss. You're losing money. But balance that with also you're losing time. You could be off doing something else. You're losing time, you're losing money. Sometimes, if you stay up all night on Shavuos, you could be losing sleep. You could be losing a lot of things doing mitzvahs. But calculate the loss that mitzvah caused you against the reward that you're going to get for it. And schar aveira. Now, what's the reward of an aveira? Pleasure. Nobody does an aveira unless there's something pleasurable in it. So, there for sure there's a schar in the aveira. And he said, I noticed in the notes that the greater the schar of the aveira, the greater the loss, the greater the punishment. So the schar aveira, let's say, limited, the instantaneous gratification of doing that aveira, whatever it is, keneged hefseda, as opposed to the loss that caused you. That is but only somebody who has, this is what we're saying here, only those who are moshlim b'yitzram, those people who have started to do this calculation, which we've been speaking about up till now, can start to make this calculation. Because otherwise a person's not aware in the first place that he's losing out or he's winning. He's not aware that he's not concentrating on what he's losing by doing these aveiros. So only a person who makes this cheshbon and understands what it is that he's losing and what it is that he's gaining in both calculations, he can make let's make the cheshbon shel olam. That is the calculation, quote unquote, of the world. V'zeh ki ha'eta amitis hazos lo yuchlu loseis osa v'lo liros amitosa ela oisam shekava yotzu metaches yad yitzram umoshelu bo. And this advice, true advice, as we said, calculate the loss of a mitzvah, keneged schara, vice versa, the schara vera, keneged hefseidah. This is something, this Eita Amitis, this true advice, is not possible to do unless, to see this, the truth of this statement, unless a person has already come out from under the hands of his Yetzer u'mosh lu bo, and dominated it. Ki mishu adayin chovush b'masa yitzro, because somebody who is as yet still trapped in the cage, in the prison of his Yetzer, ein of rois ha'emes hazos, he's not going to see this truth. Ve'ein yochol lahakira, and he's not going to be able to recognize this. Why? Ki ha'yetzer masama es einov, because the Yetzer Hara blinds his eyes, mamash, quite literally, v'hinei hu kacholech b'choshech, like a person who's going in the dark, yesh lefonov michsholos, that has in front of him stumbling blocks, concrete blocks in front of him, ve'ein einov rois osam, and his eyes do not see them. V'hu masha omer zichron levracha, that's what it says in Bava Metzia, toshes choshesh vahi laila, you have placed darkness, and behold, it's night. Two things. We're going to see here, there are two things here. Zeh ha'olam hazeh. When the Pasuk's talking about toshes choshech v'hi laila, it's in Tehillim, Psalms, that is referring to olam hazeh, which is like, compared, similar to night. V'havein kama nifla ha'mayma ha'miti hazeh. Just come and see how amazingly true this saying is. Lemi shama mik lahavin bo, for the one who troubles to analyze it. Ki hinei choshech halayla, because the darkness of night, shnei minei ta'oyos efshaloi, two possible mistakes can happen from it. Shiigrom le'ein ha'odam, which will cause to the eyes of man. O yichase es ha'anayin ad shelo yireh ma shelefonov klal. Either the darkness of being trapped in his Yetzer means that he doesn't see what is in front of him at all, or she yateh also, or he'll mistake what's in front of him. Ad sheyareh lo omud ki'ilu hu odam, until he sees a pillar, a lamppost as though it's a man, va'odam ki'ilu hu omud, and a man as though he's a pillar. The nature of darkness is not just that it means that a person will trip over things he doesn't see, but he'll completely be mistaken. He'll get things the wrong way round. Kain, chumrius v'gashmius ha'olam hazeh. Thus is the physicality, two words of physicality. So he wants to say here in the notes, chumrius is the tendency to go after this world, and gashmius is the actual what this world has to offer. It blinds the eyes of the hinehu choshech halayla le'ein haseichel. It's the darkness of night, the eye of the intellect. V'gorem lo shtei triyos, and it causes two mistakes. Ha'achas, the first, einu maniach lo shireh hamishkalos shebedarkei ha'olam He doesn't let him see the stumbling blocks that there are in the ways of this world. V'nimtza'im hafasoyim holchim. And it comes that silly, foolish people go, lebetach, with tremendous confidence, v'noflim, and they fall down, v'ovdim, and they're lost, mikol, mibli, shehigiyom pachat tichila. And they fall down without any kind of fear before this. They just, as we would say, sail along merrily, and they. V'hu ma'asha omru, it says in the pasuk, derech rishoyim ka'afela. The way of the wicked is darkness. Lo yodu b'ma koshelu. They have no idea what it is that they stumble over. V'oimeno says orum ra'ara v'nista v'soyim ovru v'nenoshu. Orum, the one who literally his eyes are uncovered. It means naked. The one who has eyes in his head, his eyes are uncovered. He sees the evil and he hides from it. And the foolish transgress and they're punished. V'oiman, it says, ukasil misaber v'moteach, that the fool misaber, he does the avera, and he's very certain what he's doing is correct. Ki libam bari lahem ku'ulam, v'noflim terem yodu. This is longer than I thought. Let's finish it off, because I want to get to the end of this idea. So that's the first kind of mistake. V'taos hasheni, the second mistake. V'hu kosher min harishon, and this is worse than the first one. Who? Shemat'er riyosam ad sheroim hara ki'ilu mamish tov. That they mistake the bad and they think it's good. V'hatov ki'ilu hora, and the good as though it's bad. U'mitoch kach mischazkim, they strengthen themselves. U'machzikim ma'aseihem haroim, and they increase they do things which are wrong because they've completely got things the wrong way around. Ki ein dai shechasem ehem nuriyas emes. It's not sufficient. It's not enough that they just don't see what the truth is. Liros hara asher neged penehem, which is in front of their faces. Ella shenir lehem lemitzvah. They see it as a mitzvah. I'm sorry. No, shenir lehem limsoy royas gedolas, that they find great proofs. V'nisyonos mochachim, and experiences and experience that shows, that prove le'sfaroseihem haroyos, for their evil calculations, philosophies, u'ladeosem hakozavos, and their twisted ideas. I was just thinking that nowadays, you see, we'll finish here, but you see nowadays how there's been an entire sea change in the attitude of people to human sexual activity, which the Torah considers in many places bans completely. It's got to the point now that parents are not allowed to educate their children in the normality of human relations, that's considered to be an evil, and that if they're not fed them with this diet of twisted understanding of human relations, physical relations, they're in a way, they're to be rebuked, and how dare they not to. I mean, the most terrible things, I don't have to go into details, are going on with young children who change their genders. I mean, it's unbelievable how people can take their mistaken ideas and they can believe, and as he's saying here, bring all these proofs for their twisted, wrong opinions, because they do not see what the correct truth is. So, again, just to sum up, what we're talking about here is a person has to analyze the true good, the true evil. He has to fit into that, what his actions are before and after he does them. He has to separate from his actions retrospectively to make sure that there's no bad habit, bad midah, or bad action. And then he has to be mashmesh. He has to check even his good actions to make sure there's nothing awry with those. And the only way he can do this properly is to set aside times in a completely structured way that allows him to do this and to build within himself an ability to see the truth of that statement, of the calculation of schar mitzvah keneged hefseda, neged schar avera neged hefsada. Okay, we'll see you next week, B'ezrat Hashem. Kol tov.